There's a single number that quietly decides whether you ever get to stop working, and most people have no idea what theirs is. They save for decades with a vague hope that someday it'll be enough, and somehow that someday never quite arrives, because they're aiming at a target they have never actually calculated. In the next few minutes, I'll show you how to find that number. It's simpler than you think. It's built on one well-known rule, and once you see it, retirement stops being a feeling and becomes math. Quick note before we start. This is educational, not financial advice. Here's how most people think about retirement. They ask, how much do I need to save? And they reach for a big round number. 500,000. A million. Because it sounds like a lot. But that number on its own is almost meaningless. $1 million means something completely different to someone who spends $30,000 a year than it does to someone who spends 90. The right question was never how big is my pile. The right question is, how much does my life actually cost? And how large does the pile need to be to cover that cost forever without me adding another dollar? Flip the question, and the whole thing suddenly gets clearer. And here's why most people never flip it. That number feels scary. It feels like something only a financial advisor with a suit and a spreadsheet is allowed to know. So they avoid it. They keep saving into the fog, hoping it works out, because a vague fear is somehow easier to live with than a concrete one. But that's exactly backwards. The concrete number is the thing that sets you free, because you can only aim at a target you can actually see. So the first thing you need isn't an advisor or a complicated projection. It's one honest number. What does a year of your life cost right now? Add up the essentials first. Housing, food, utilities, insurance, transportation, then add the rest. The subscriptions, the dinners out, the travel, all the little stuff that quietly adds up. Most people underestimate this by a wide margin because the small recurring things hide in plain sight. If you're not sure where to start, take 3 months of your actual spending, average it, and multiply by 12. That's your real annual cost. And it's the foundation for everything that comes next. Once you have that number, here's where one of the most famous ideas in personal finance comes in. It's often called the 4% rule. It came out of research in the 1990s that looked back across decades of market history, including some brutal stretches, to answer one simple question. How much could someone pull out of their savings each year without running out of money? The researchers tested it against real history, the crashes and the booms, and the answer they kept landing on was about 4%. Withdraw roughly 4% of your invested savings in your first year of retirement, adjust that amount for inflation each year after, and historically your money had a very high chance of lasting 30 years or more. Now here's the genuinely useful part. If 4% a year is what you can safely take out, you can flip it around to find your target. Take the amount you spend in a year and multiply it by 25. That's your number. 25 times your annual spending. Why 25? Because 4% is just another way of saying 1/25th. So if you need to live on 4% of a pile, the pile has to be 25 times what you pull from it each year. Let's make that real with actual numbers. Say your life costs $40,000 a year. 40,000 times 25 is $1 million. So a million invested, spending 40,000 a year, is roughly your target. If your life costs 60,000 a year, 60 times 25 is 1.5 million. But watch what happens if you go the other way. If you can get your spending down to 30,000 a year, your number drops to 750,000. That's a full $250,000 lower, just from spending less. And that reveals the thing almost nobody realizes. Your retirement number isn't really about how much you earn. It's about how much you spend. Two people with the exact same salary can have targets that differ by hundreds of thousands of dollars purely because of their lifestyle. Lower your spending, and you don't just save faster. You shrink the finish line and move it closer at the same time. Which raises the obvious next question. How fast can you actually get there? And here's something that surprises people. In the early years, how much you save matters far more than what return you earn. Imagine two people both aiming at $1 million. One saves $1,000 a month, the other saves $2,000. Even before you factor in any market growth at all, the second person is building their pile twice as fast. Investment returns become the dominant force later, once the pile is large and compounding is doing the heavy lifting. But in the beginning, your savings rate is the engine. That's why the single most powerful lever most people have isn't a hotter investment. It's the gap between what they earn and what they spend. Now, you might be wondering how you can pull money out every single year and not eventually go broke. The answer is that your savings aren't sitting in a drawer. They're invested, and they keep growing. In a normal year, a diversified portfolio might grow by more than the 4% you're taking out. So a lot of the time, you're living off the growth, not the principal itself. Some years the market falls and you dip into the pile a little. Other years it climbs and the pile gets bigger. There's a real risk hidden in here, though, and it even has a name: sequence of returns. If the market crashes in your first few years of retirement while you're also pulling money out, it can do lasting damage because you're selling investments while they're down. The 4% figure was chosen specifically to survive exactly that nightmare, including the case of someone retiring right before a major crash. It's a deliberately conservative number, built for bad luck. Now, I'd be doing you a disservice if I made this sound flawless, so here are the honest caveats. First, 4% is a guideline, not a guarantee. Some experts argue for 3.5% to be safer, especially for people retiring very early, whose money might need to last 40 or 50 years instead of 30. Second, the rule doesn't include big wildcards like major healthcare costs or long-term care, which can be significant. Third, it assumes your money is actually invested for growth, not sitting in cash slowly losing value to inflation. Fourth, it says nothing about taxes, which will take a bite depending on what kinds of accounts your money's held in. And fifth, on the brighter side, it ignores income like Social Security or a pension, which you don't have to withdraw for and which can meaningfully lower the pile you personally need to build. None of that breaks the rule. It just means 25 times your spending is your starting point, not your finish line. Let me also clear up 3 myths that keep people stuck. Myth 1: you need millions to retire. The reality is you need 25 times your spending, and plenty of people live comfortably on far less than $1 million. Myth 2: one bad market will wipe you out. The reality is the 4% rule was stress tested against the worst downturns in modern history and still held up. And myth 3, the most dangerous one of all: I'll just work forever, so I don't need a number. The reality is that health, layoffs, and age very often make that decision for you, whether you plan for it or not. Knowing your number isn't about quitting tomorrow, it's about having the choice. But here's what I really want you to walk away with. The single most powerful move in this entire equation isn't finding a better investment or trying to time the market. It's simply knowing your number. Because the moment you know it, everything changes. Saving stops being an anxious, bottomless chore and becomes a finish line you can actually see. You can track your progress, you can watch the gap slowly close, and you start making sharper decisions. Because once you truly understand that trimming $5,000 a year from your spending lowers your target by $125,000, that recurring expense you never think twice about starts to look very different. So let's bring it home. Your retirement number is roughly 25 times what you spend in a year. It comes from the 4% rule, the amount history says you can withdraw each year without running out. It's driven far more by your spending than your income. And in the early years, your savings rate matters more than your returns. Treat the number as a starting point. Adjust it down for safety, account for things like taxes and healthcare, and adjust for help like Social Security. But above all else, calculate it. Most people never do, and that is exactly why retirement feels so vague and so impossibly far away. Do the math one time, and you turn a lifelong worry into a target you can actually aim at. If this was useful, subscribe, because next time we're breaking down index funds, explained so simply you'll wonder why anyone ever made it complicated. This video is for general education only and is not financial advice.